Shanta, it's good to see you.
It's great to see you. Thanks for having me, Nick.
You're welcome. So Shanta, you are the Chief Artistic Officer at Lincoln Center.
That's right.
But previously, you were running Joe's Pub and the Public Theater.
With some other people, yes.
Yes. So where I'd like to start is that those are very different venues than Lincoln Center, right? Different size, different scale. And I'm curious from a programming perspective, as you think about it artistically, how do you approach your job within those two very different contexts?
Yeah, thank you. So for those of you who are not as familiar or maybe don't know what Joe's Pub is, Joe's Pub, 180-seat cabaret venue downtown. It's part of the Public Theater. The Public Theater is also Shakespeare in the Park. It has had 5 major programs. And after I ran Joe's Pub for 10 years, I ran all of the programs of the Public for another 3. And then came uptown to Lincoln Center. I assume you have some sense of what Lincoln Center is. But Lincoln Center is actually 11 organizations that are within that complex. I'm the artistic director of one of them, Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, but one of my roles within that is to work with all of the other 10. So we uphold what they're doing, look at the work they're doing. We don't do the work they're doing. We sort of try to stay out of their lane, but support what's happening and support the places of connection between us. And then make sure that Lincoln Center is a place where the best of artists from around the world can find a place to be, and the best of audiences from around New York City and the world can find a place to be. And so Joe's Pub, to start there, is a venue that has about 800 shows a year. And actually, I would say when I came up to Lincoln Center, everybody who talked to me about it was like, whoa, you're ready. You better be ready for a massive culture shock. And we were in the middle of a pandemic, so I felt quite ready for a culture shock. There was culture shocks happening daily. The idea of what we were doing and how we were doing it was sort of sifting through our fingers every second. And rebuilding our world was a daily practice. So the idea of culture change shift didn't really bother me. I wasn't intimidated by it. And only one person said to me, oh, it's the same 5 kind of people. And you just find your people that are the same kind of people that were supporting you and understood what you were doing. And actually, I think that applied to the work itself. The work itself was about using the resources we have as curators and working within an arts organization, stewarding the resources and looking at what we have. So what's the kind of stage we have? I thought about that all the time at Joe's Pub. Joe's Pub is a cabaret space, so everything that comes there becomes cabaret. You can come in as a rock band and you leave a cabaret artist, because something about the architecture, all of a sudden you're starting to tell stories, even though you went in thinking I'm gonna do my set from start to finish. And that's something you don't do actually if you were going to Webster Hall. And so you have to really look at and be informed by the resources you have. And Lincoln Center obviously has very different resources. Of course, the money is very different, what we are able to pay artists, how we pay artists. But the parameters are just different. The types of stage, what makes sense, what is going to sound great here, and then which are the artists that have never had access to a space like this, that their work actually can stand alongside Brahms and Bach and Beethoven, but they have never been in this actual space that Brahms and Bach and Beethoven get to inhabit all the time. And so the space itself transforms them. So I think those basics of how to curate and how to use your resource sort of shift the job.
So I think that last part is very interesting to me, because I'm sure it's a very delicate balancing act between upholding tradition of a place as esteemed and global as Lincoln Center, but also making space for new voices, right? Who have maybe never had the opportunity to be on such a major environment. And so how do you approach that?
In a couple ways. I think we're not compromising on the quality of the work. So you start with the premise that we're gonna find these artists that are at the peak of their craft, that are representing communities of people. They've come up, they've done the work. They have played Joe's Pub, they've played many places around New York City and the globe, and have somehow or another not found their way to Lincoln Center. And then we make a way. We find a way for them to have those stepping stones if they need them. Most of the time they don't. Sometimes it's finding stepping stones for their audience who have actually never seen a door open for them in the way that we have approached them. So we're finding all of the ways that they can meet their audience, because actually it's the job of a performing arts center often is to put an artist in touch with their audience and then get out of the way. And often, I think pre-pandemic, for most of us, including myself, thought of, okay, well, we have this performing arts center, doesn't matter who you are, what you are, you think people are following the brand. And they're gonna, if they know, they trust Joe's Pub, they trust the Public Theater, and they're gonna follow us and explore. And I think people started making different choices with their time, with their money, but the thing that people trust is artists. They love an artist because an artist is speaking to them directly, and the reason that an artist has moved through their career is because they have some sort of intangible authenticity that they have been able to harness and speak to a community in a way that reflects their experience. So if we can create the space for an artist to do that in the best way they can and for their audience to find them, there's no question that Eddie Palmieri belongs at Lincoln Center alongside Beethoven. These are legends of all time, and we have the responsibility of putting artists in the place that 200 years from now, people will be talking about Eddie Palmieri and playing this music in halls all over the world. And we'll be talking about, oh, can you remember of the first time you heard them play in the Bronx? They used to play in these small house concerts. And then you see the way that these artists have been elevated over time by the community. And that is the role, I think, of a presenter, which is my job most of the time, to be able to be listening and aware of those steps along the way.
I'm sort of curious, I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about your role and how you describe it as sort of putting the artist in touch with their audience and then getting out of the way, because I think it's a very humble way of looking at the complex number of things that you do. But I feel like having a really keen aesthetic eye or ear or both is necessary, but also understanding how do you structure a season? How do you adequately read a complex metropolitan community, right? How do you balance the needs of different stakeholders, whether that be board members or people who live in your backyard? And so I'm curious how much or what role your own personal trajectory and personal experiences plays in your artistic sifting mechanism.
Well, one, I would say, we talked about this a little bit, but this idea of this very charismatic leader running a performing arts center and then just knowing what everybody needs to get them to the next, and putting together a season that speaks to the breadth of experiences in a city like New York, I find absurd. It's just not possible. There are so many people here. And the way that, music, theater, art is consumed now is also very different than it was. The way art, music, everything is made is so different than it was not that long ago. Like, really, it's different than it was made last year. And so first of all, I don't just curate. I have multiple curators that are on my team that are out seeing shows. I've been out the last 14 nights seeing everything that's opening in New York City. My team is doing the exact same thing, and not because they have to do that, but because they are driven by that. And they're bringing those stories of the artists. We do count on the artists to be really, we talk about this all the time, that the artists of our community and of our time are the ones telling us what's the story of right now that does actually cross all of our differences, and what can be a story of New York City right now. What are the problems of right now? I don't know if any of you can imagine any, but there are some. And the idea that our artists are always like 3 or 4 steps ahead of us and have been reflecting this world to us in a way that maybe we haven't been able to see. And so to have that opportunity to see it all together in these big spaces is really a gift. So my own story is that I went to school for theater. I grew up in Indiana, in a very small town with a dad who was a forester and a mom who was a teacher's assistant, but in a family full of art making. but with very few opportunities to see art. And then I had an aunt, Sadi, who moved to New York when I was 10 and became Judith Jamison's assistant at Alvin Ailey. And so then I came to New York and was like, please don't make me go back to Indiana. and you know, we came often, and I fell in love with the city and with the ideas of the city and the possibility of what it meant to not look like anybody I saw instead of just not looking like anybody in my neighborhood. And then, you know, I went to school for theater. I also got my degree in management at the Kelly School, and came to New York and thought I was going to be an actress and became a manager.
So when I think of Lincoln Center and when I hear a lot of people talk about Lincoln Center, it's sort of one of these cultural institutions that almost seems or feels too big to fail, right? And I'm curious if there is something that all of us could take away of a way in which we could collectively help Lincoln Center, or if you could wave a magic wand and have people understand something about what it is that you do, or something that what it is that your team does, what would that thing be? Because I think for a lot of us that's kind of hidden.
Well, we're talking a lot about in one of the earlier questions, but what do we need right now? And this idea of isolationism, and how do we tell people to go see art without telling them, you know, it's not broccoli. and this idea, I mean, I would love for every organization, for every corporation in this city to make it part of their HR policy that every single member of that company has to see 2 things a month, or that there is a part of this mandate that is about wellness, that's about being a citizen, that's about being part of this city that actually you have investment in and you have to be a part of. You do not, if you are a leader of this city, you cannot go home and order in every night and be a part of the city. You just can't do it. So I would love for there to feel like there was a corporate responsibility that is embedded in how to make the arts part of everyone's life, and not in a take your medicine sort of way, but in a let's do this. This is the fun of being in an urban environment. And I think we all know that. Everybody in this room certainly knows that. But there's a way to move to the city now and live here and never know that. And we have to interrupt that.
There's a guy named Stan Bergman that I interviewed for an After Arts breakfast pre-pandemic with Peter Gelb, and Stan's on the board of the Met. And it was funny because he first started going to the opera because of his boss. And Stan was like, I hated the opera. I didn't like going to the opera. I only went because of work. And by being forced to go because his boss loved the opera and his boss was on the board, he fell in love with opera. And then once his boss stepped off the board, he joined the board. And now he forces all of his subordinates to go to the opera with him. And he's like, if you work with me, you will go to the opera. It is part of your job. And he's like, I've converted so many people to the world, to the religion of opera, which I think is pretty great. But I think, yeah, the idea of having it be sort of built in and sort of a sort of corporate civic duty, I think would be a very interesting thing of being involved in some kind of way.
Yeah, also it's, you know, in a lot of places, all of our programming over the last 3 years is free and choose what you pay. And so the audiences look like New York. And I also think there's a way that your New York can be so small here. And no matter who you are and where you sit with it, you know, you can live in your neighborhood and never leave it, and especially now. So I think this idea of actually like remembering for ourselves that this is the incredible promise of an urban environment. There's plenty to complain about living in a big city, and we all do every day, I'm sure. And there is plenty to, you know, for your own well-being, remind yourself that this is a glorious place where you do actually get to be in multi-generational, multiracial environments with people that are not like you. And you can imagine that this is a place where everyone has a shot.
Shanta, thank you very much.